Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Atipso Mutudi, and I'll be taking you through the first installment of the day. I'm joined here by Mr. Kabo Diamond Moseki, who's the Executive Secretary of Botswana Country Community Mechanism of the Global Fund, where he provides strategic oversight for the Global Fund grant to Botswana, gaining experience from public, private, international development. He brings extensive experience in community programming, particularly in violence and HIV. Early in his career, Mr. Kabo has led Botswana's first NGO to pioneer a male involvement in HIV programming, which we'll share much on. And he's also an academic. He holds 2 master's degrees, a degree, and in his final year, Bachelor of Laws program. I think this is to show his dedication to professional excellence and impactful programming. Mr. Kabo, can you kindly tell us about yourself and the NGO, your work, and your involvement in analyzing and tackling gender-based violence?
Thank you very much, Tsepiso, and good day to the listeners and those watching at home. I think you've given a very good introduction of me, but I could just say that I come into the issues that we are going to discuss here today because of my background working with civil society, yes, and at some point working with a civil society organization or an NGO that has had a specific focus on men. It was programming for men in the HIV space. Yes. It was the first NGO in the country to pioneer programs on male involvement into HIV, yes, which was a very, very successful project that had a success rate of, I think, 95%. That was at the time when we were introducing the PMTCT program, Prevention of Mother-to-Child Transmission of the Disease. So initially when the program started, there was a struggle in terms of women enrolling in the program. And we realized that the problem was not necessarily the women themselves, but the problem was that men have been left out of the program. So they didn't play a big role in terms of working with the women to access the service. So the moment there were attempts or there were programs that brought men into that program, it became a success. And that for me explains a lot of things, that oftentimes we design programs with only women or men in our minds, and it at the end of the day doesn't work. I think the best programs that work are those that take cognizance of the both genders.
All right, thank you. Yeah. And yes, in that, can you speak to how your analysis has been in tackling, this prevalent issue called gender-based violence?
Well, I think my analysis so far has been that gender-based violence has caused largely by structural issues. Yes. It's caused by issues of inequalities. We live in one of the most unequal societies in the world, where there are very few rich people and there are a lot of people that are in poverty. So the distribution of resources in this country is not equal, which leaves a lot of our people to be dealing with issues of poverty. And this poverty, more than anybody else, affects young people. It affects women. And what it means is that many of the relationships that happen in this country are usually of unequal. The power there is unequal. Yes. It's usually the men that have got the resources. The women didn't have the resources. So those are some of the structural issues. And then also there are issues of culture. We live in a patriarchal society, and it's not really very easy to reform a lot of our cultural practices. So there is that element also. Yes. So basically structural issues, yes, those are the issues that I have found to be a big contributor to GBV.
Yes, we did speak about, the vast experience that you have and the information that you have, after speaking about those educational backgrounds. The president recently asked a question. Hana bua gona gore, when does violence then become gender-based violence? How do you understand such a question, and what's your answer there too?
I think that is a good question. In fact, we should have long reflected on that kind of question, because understanding where the problem is like what other people say is in part solving the problem. It's very key to understand the problem before you can actually provide credible solutions to it. So I think we need to find out exactly, because the other day I heard that the last study that was done on this area was about 7 years ago, 2018. That's a long time ago.
Yes, that's a huge gap. It's a huge gap.
Yeah, it's a huge gap. This should actually be happening on regular intervals, and sometimes even desk research could fill in the gaps.
Yes.
We shouldn't be taking such a long time without doing the necessary research. That could inform us about the nature of the violence. Because if it is gender-based violence, then it is violence that is directly linked to the fact that it's one gender violating another gender because I'm a man or because I'm a woman, then I'm doing what I'm doing. Because I'm a man, I'm stronger than a woman. I have got more resources than a woman. I feel I'm in a position where I'm able to order the woman around, those kind of things. So I think we need to first establish that. But I want to agree with the president when he says that there's a general culture of violence in this country. And GBV, for me, is part of the violence that is in this country. So we are a violent society, yes, but then we are a violent society that is also suffering from the GBV pandemic.
Yes.
So maybe we need to address the general violence while also addressing the GBV, because the GBV one is the one that we know very well. It's violence that is directly linked to people's assigned genders. If I'm a man, if I have the resources, if I think I'm the one that is to tell my wife or my daughter or my sister what to do, I can order her around simply because I'm a man, then that is GBV. But if we are generally just a violent society, we will be violating each other, not necessarily because of those gender roles.
Yes, that was an in-depth explanation and analysis to the question. And I think that is also to say that gender-based violence comes in all manner of forms, shapes, and or maybe color, right? But then maybe just to speak to something that you had said before, that is to say gender-based violence comes in an instance where it is one gender to another gender. In situations where it is people of the same sex, same gender, what reference then do we refer that to? Is it gender-based violence?
Yeah, it can be gender-based violence.
Yes.
And this is how it could be gender-based violence. It could be gender-based violence because maybe in that relationship, people have assigned roles to say, even we're of the same sex, one has taken a masculine sort of approach, and they have certain expectations of their partner to be submissive because as far as they are concerned in that relationship, the other one is the junior partner or something like that. Then that in that instance it becomes GBV.
Yes.
Because it has the elements of those gender as the assigned roles. That I'm a man, this one is a woman, this one is I'm a senior partner in this relationship, this one is a junior partner, something like that.
Yes.
So that is the instance in which it could be GBV.
Yes.
But it could also simply be just violence.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You go on to speak to maybe the causes or why then GBV comes into place. In maybe your studies, your research, and the activities that you've been engaged in, what do you think are the core causes of violence in romantic relationships? Like, what could be the cause? The financial status of maybe one individual. Are there more causes to that?
Yeah, well, there's the economic,
Yes.
the inequalities that comes about because of the economics there. And then there's the cultural norms where men are expected to act in a certain way and women are expected to act in a certain way. And then there's also issues of trauma, issues of one's state of mind, that those kind of things. There's also issues of abuse of substances. People that abuse alcohol, people that abuse drugs are more likely to engage in that kind of violence. Yes.
And maybe speaking to trauma, ele trauma ya mohuta o he, maybe
Trauma
past
because I
Yes.
grew up in a family or coming from a background where gender-based violence was normalized, where I saw on a daily basis my father beating up my mother or something like that.
Okay.
So, that can bring trauma to the children.
All right. Yes. And taking us back to Henry Simolla, you did speak to maybe the issues that these structural indifferences, right? And I don't know if maybe you're speaking to the laws that you have in Botswana, policies, and if at all that was the case. What are the shortcomings of the law if it all is an issue of law? Don't we have policies around that to assist in issues of GBV?
Yeah, definitely I would say when it comes to laws and policies, there is need to strengthen what is already available.
Yes.
There is also need to promote things like access. There are certain areas where you cannot even access a police station, and there are certain areas where you cannot even access a counselor, you cannot access basic services. So, and also the system that we have here, I think it deals with violence as a general disorder in society, but does not specifically deal with violence that is GBV.
Yes.
Where you'd have certain things, like the assistance that could be given to people that have been violated. And even those that violate other people, they definitely need some kind of rehabilitation. There is no program, especially at least from government that I know, that deals with people who are perpetrators of violence, to say that now this person has been violating another person. What then needs to happen to this person? Does he have to go to counseling or stuff like that? So we need to strengthen those kind of things. We need to strengthen access to the services. We need to have those counselors readily available. We need to have the police readily available. We need to also, through the courts, be able to grant the restrictions. If people need to be restricted from others, that should be easy to obtain. So we need to look at all those things and make sure that we get them right in order to partly fight GBV.
Yes.
But importantly, we need the education. We need to educate people on GBV so that people recognize what GBV is. And because a lot of people actually that are doing GBV, they don't recognize it as GBV. That is why they can even participate in a discussion like this without seeing themselves as perpetrators of GBV. So we need to look at those, because GBV does not only end or does not start with you beating up somebody physically.
Yes.
What you say to people. I mean, a lot of men complain about what women say to them, and women also complain about what men say to them. That is GBV. That is violence. So those are the kind of things that needs to be addressed.
Yes, you did highlight quite a lot of shortcomings in the law, and maybe spoke to some of the recommendations that could be employed. Given your work in the civil society organizations, in that scope of work, what work are they doing around this in issues of advocacy?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few organizations in this country. The tragedy with the civil society in this country is that it doesn't have resources. Yes. This is an upper middle income country, so it doesn't have donor resources from outside. If it's not HIV, then for the other areas, we are expected to raise money within the country, but we have not gotten to that stage where we are able to raise funds within the country. So I know about 1, 2, 3 organizations that have been laboring in the area, and issues of advocacy, as advocacy happens, but they are not able to take it to the four corners of this country. Because of lack of resources, they are not able to employ the relevant people with the relevant skills to provide the counseling, and they have what you call lay counselors. They don't have those highly trained psychologists, psychotherapists, and all those. They need money to be able to afford those kind of people, and those organizations also need money to be able to. If somebody comes to them and says that I'm facing GBV at home, they should be able to take them and put them in a safe place. But they don't have the resources to do so. So those are some of the things that we need to look at to be able to provide the safe space for victims of GBV, and also to provide the necessary resources for advocacy purposes, and for provision of services like psychosocial therapy. So those kind of things, we need to avail the resources, and I think that's when we will partly get the results that we want.
Okay, so I asked that question just so that I can appreciate maybe what the society is doing when it comes to this issue of gender-based violence. So might I ask this question then now to say, is the violence a result of failure in laws or the system in place to enforce the laws?
It could be in part be the failure of the laws and the failure to enforce the laws. Okay. So I think in equal measure they can be shared between the two. It's not either or, it's between both of them. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Gongwe re boela gape ga moragonyana ga le re name re mepele ka tsa advocacy le molao. Ke botse gone gore when a mother is disciplining their child, when a father is disciplining their child, or maybe when a teacher is disciplining a student, is this seen as a case of gender-based violence though?
Yeah, it may depend on the background to that. I mean, if I beat up my son because I want him to be a man, that is gender-based violence. I'm beating him up because I'm expecting him to toughen up to be a man. And if I beat up my daughter because I want her to be submissive, that is GBV.
Yes.
Yes. But if I simply just beat them for being naughty and not necessarily because of those, it may be gender violence. It may not necessarily be GBV. It depends on the reasons why I'm administering that kind of punishment. Yes.
So in the case when it's a teacher, disciplining a student.
Yes, if a student, for example, if a teacher decides to wallop a girl child because she's too noisy for a girl child, that is GBV. But if she's simply administering that punishment because she was making noise, and she's not saying it's because it's a girl who's making noise, then it's violence, but not GBV. So that is how we distinguish between gender violence and the GBV should have an element of the gender role. You need to be beating that little girl because she's too noisy for a girl. She's not humble enough for a girl. She's not, all those kind of things. And you're beating up this boy child because he's not responsible enough. That kind of thing. So in that area, when you do that, it's GBV.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So then, when then do we draw the line? Where then do we draw the line of accepting? Of acceptable violence, right? Kana ke tekile motsadi ke batla gone gore ngwana ke ya ka no sta go dirisa se ke sa gone gore a ska palwa ke lelwa. But expectation is you just speak to expectation, but expectation is nya gongwe monna tata gona tlhokomela lelwa. So ha ere gona di ke di santse gongwe di supala gore ke santse ke le monye ke le kana ke a betswa gore me motho di ke di supa gona ka tlhokomela lelwa. Ha ya no a ra we shouldn't accept any form of maybe discipline. I know I used as the word to say violence, but that manner of discipline so where then do you draw that line of acceptable violence?
No, I don't think there's any kind of violence that is acceptable.
Yes.
In my view, violence is unacceptable, and whether it's little or whatever reason that it's been done for, it's not acceptable, because it has been proven time and again that if you administer this kind of violent punishments, you are essentially turning people into, you are turning them violent. They start to believe that if I want my wife to behave properly, I have to administer some kind of punishment. If I want my husband to behave this way, I have to administer some sort of punishment which may be violent. So I don't think there's any place for violence in a civilized society like ours. We must explore alternative ways of discipline in schools, at home, and all that. But we must basically embrace new ways of conflict resolution between the partners. They should be able to talk things out. I think that's where these things come in. But in terms of violence, there is no acceptable level of violence on any other person, because it simply does not work. It creates a violent society. People start believing that if I truly love this guy, if I truly want to help my son, if I truly want to help my daughter, I have to administer this violent punishment to them. No, it doesn't work. So it's unacceptable, and no amount of violence is acceptable.
All right. So is it safe then now to say that culture plays a role in perpetuating violence, in domestic and romantic relationships?
Yes, it does. Culture is the biggest culprit here. It's the one that, in many instances, it's responsible for GBV. It reinforces GBV. So we must look at those parts of our culture that reinforce GBV and deal with them. As a society, the thing about culture is this, and sometimes when people say this is our culture, this is how we've been doing things, they forget that culture changes. Culture changes, and culture should change for the better. As we become more civilized, as we become a more modern society, we need to discard some of the things that are not working for us. And the administering of punishment to others through violence is one of the things that we need to cut with immediate effect. And it starts right at home. It starts within relationships. I cannot be dealing with my partner through violence. I cannot be dealing with my children through violence.
Yes.
I cannot be dealing with my friends through violence. So we shouldn't be violent. And I think also even the state itself, it does not need to be violent. Yes, they should make other ways of administering punishment for those who have done wrong. And most importantly, we must prioritize rehabilitation. We must put people through programs that shape their behavior, that changes their behavior. Yes. The reason why we are still struggling with things like GBV is that we don't have those programs in place. Because we accept the punishment of others through violence as part and parcel of our culture. It means that we don't see the need to then get these people to actually be rehabilitated, because we know that once they do this kind of thing, we are going to beat them up, that kind of thing. That does not solve anything. And if in many cases, the people people they are dealt with violently for doing things wrong, they keep on repeating. Does the violence work then? It doesn't work. So we must discard the violence.
Okay. Culture. Some people bring in a submission in the conversation to say chaba and Baba Bari we should maybe evolve with our culture, do with certain things. We are adopting the Western culture then now. And usually these conversations or these submissions are brought up by culture. So then how then do we relay the message to them in terms of saying we are still maintaining our culture? It's not an issue of us adopting something from the Western cultures, but us saying how do we have these conversations with our elders?
Yeah, I think we need to be deliberate about having those conversations in the first place. The one thing that I said earlier on that is lacking is that we don't have the resources to carry out the public campaigns that are necessary for behavior change. The reason why we're able to overcome struggles like both HIV and AIDS is because we were having campaigns, we were creating awareness of what works and what doesn't work.
Yes.
And people, it has been proven over the years. The first time we got a case here, HIV, which is nearly 40 or so years ago, to where we are now. As a society, we have changed a lot of our cultural practices, because if we did not change, we were going to be annihilated by this disease. So we are facing another pandemic where we need to have the similar approach, the education, the behavior change, getting men to be involved in this whole thing, because many times they are the ones perpetrating the violence. Having programs specifically targeted at them, targeted at women, targeted at children, because children provide the greatest opportunity for us, because they are the window of hope. What you teach a child is likely to be taken. They grow up with it, and they become changed in time. And well, for old people, we don't give up on them. We continue also with that kind of education in order for them to see the light. Because anyone that believes in violence is somebody that is in the dark. So they need to see the light. We need to do it convincingly, showing them that this actually does not work. This is where the research is going to be important. This is where the examples that we can get showing that people actually do not change because they are being beaten up. Those kind of things. And I think this is stuff that people back at home know very well, that people don't change because they get beaten up. People change because they see that what they are doing is not working, and that kind of thing. So we need to have that approach. But until we have those deliberate programs, unfortunately we will have to be struggling. We will be struggling with GBV. So we need to be deliberate in terms of dealing with it. And like I said, the way that we have dealt with the pandemic, HIV, presents lessons for us to adopt in fighting GBV.
Yes. So you speak to a number of structural changes, adjustments. You also speak to programs. Kana ya no had na te potso na go no re le ba bomang, because with the civil society space we know the lack of resources. Re le ba bomang e bile re simolla ga kae twantsho ya go leka go dira those structural adjustments and the education and the programs you just mentioned.
Yeah, we are looking at everybody.
Yes.
This is multi-sectoral approach. That is one of the things that we are going to have to use in order to defeat this monster. Everybody will need to bring something to the table. Government will also be having to bring in the legislation, the policies, and the necessary support in terms of the resources. And then civil society will also bring the skills. They have the skills. They already have programs. It's about expanding those programs to the areas where the programs are not there. The private sector also, because the people that get beaten, the people that get violated, they work somewhere. So just like when we were fighting HIV and AIDS, we ended up saying to private sector, the people that are sick are your people. If they don't come to work, you are losing. If they're always on sick leave. So why don't you become an active participant in trying to solve this issue? So this is how we need everyone on board. We need the churches. We need the Baruti to talk about these things. We need even the traditional doctors to talk about it. We need Baholo to do Kosi Bomang. It's a multi-sectoral approach that needs just about everybody on the table. So this
is a pandemic that not only one man can fight.
No,
needs all of us.
Not one man can fight. And I want to say this. I know this was very controversial when the minister said that there is no other way. That is what needs to happen. In bringing all the solutions that we are proposing, we also at the end of the day need to look at the individual to say, what is your contribution to fighting GBV? What are you going to do to stop GBV? So in my view, what the minister said was proper. it was appropriate. We need to also look at ourselves and say, what is my contribution going to be? So that I don't keep pointing fingers at government, at private sector, at civil society, at the victims. Because the other thing that we can do is to perpetually be pointing fingers at the victims and say, you are the problem. If you didn't do A, B, C, D, you are not going to be beaten. That kind of thing.
Yes.
We need to look at the individuals and say, now what does an individual bring to the table? What does the group bring to the table? I've talked about groups, I've talked about institutions. Now, in the end, when we look at it, we also need the contribution of the individual. That is how we are going to be able to defeat the monster.
Yes.
Yes.
You did speak about rehabilitation of perpetrators, right? And I want to believe maybe you might have come across one or two articles in the media. I know someone who's from jail, if I may, went on and did another. Meet another offense in the same manner. Because already I think we can see a shortcoming, if at all maybe you'd want to agree with me that there is a shortcoming in that aspect. How then do we as a society, because it takes a village, right? How then do we society? Because it takes a village. You can say, institution, rehabilitation, let's put it back on government.
So if we believed that people are truly getting the rehabilitation, prison, the thing is here, you know that a lot of people think that prison, nothing goes on there. Or won't society but if people began to understand, and I'm glad that I had what the president say, essentially to correctional services and that would remove us from also thinking that the only thing that happens when somebody gets this prison sentence is just isolation from society. We should also, if we appreciate and understand that there is also rehabilitation that is happening there, it would be very easy for us to accept these people, because we would know that now that they are out, they have gone through a rehabilitation process. So, as a society, we need to understand certain things. Very few people understand what goes on in the prisons.
Yes.
People think it's just isolation from society. They don't understand that. So we need to isolate people, but just not simply just isolating them, while isolating them, rehabilitate them so that they come back to society and become responsible members of society. And go an extra mile. Use the people that have reformed, that have been through the rehabilitation, to be the teachers.
Yes.
Because what we see in many cases, they are completely isolated to the extent that any responsibility. And if you know it, any person that you don't give responsibility, you may be creating a problem there, because we are creatures that need to be responsible for something as human beings. So we need to give people responsibility. How when a responsibility a former murder convict or a spirit or tota go bola ga se solution ga seng le gore wena when you kill another person you also die in the process.
Yes.
Because I don't think you can kill a person and come out okay. They need to be sharing more of the stories. We need to see them on documentaries, on TV, on platforms like this, talking to other people. So isn't re ba khopela go thoko hela be re no rona re tla bona gore re tswela yang without these people. For as long as we bring them back to society, yes, when they come here, they must have a role to play. And their specific role in this instance can be being advocates against violence.
Yes.
And it is needed. But I go to Quelling, how one I go school, how one I go school, how well I've lost 20 years of my life. Please don't do the same thing. Kids get the message. Not only kids, other people also get the message. So Haranaldi support group because more HIV in the fight against HIV. Really Haranaldi support group Sabato Baba and the ARV or Babolele Baba Tabango the ARV or Nyamuka Nawatila. You know, that kind of thing. So the model should be nearly the same. We will track it here and there, but I believe that there's a lot to be learned from that the HIV fight. So let's use people that have been those who have been perpetrators of violence. If we truly believe them to have reformed, yes.
Yes, that speaks to reintegration,
Yes,
into the society.
Yes, yes.
And you should do away with the stigma and the
Yes.
discrimination, right? But then, looking into your stigma and discrimination, and also the trauma, help us understand then what role does the state of mind and psychology play in issues of gender-based violence?
Well, like I said earlier, if somebody has grown up in an environment where there is violence, they tend to believe that the way to address issues is through violence. If people they have abusing substances and all that, it also affects their emotional state. They become imbalanced, and they are most likely to react violently to situations. So that could perpetuate GBV. Neonatal trauma that could perpetuate GBV. So a person's state of mind is quite important. That is why we need to provide the facilities I was talking about. It's our counseling and all those things, so that people can be able. I think one of the most important things we as a perpetrator violence or no, the way I act is not right, the way I speak is not right. So I personally allow to help access that service. And for you to access that service, the service needs to exist. At the moment, it's difficult to find the service. But we need to have those services readily available. So a person's state of mind is very important. People, if they are not in the right state of the mind, they are likely to react to situations violently. But if they are in the right state of mind, if they are getting the help that we have been talking about, they are able to live with us. That kind of violence that we see. But the problem is that we know that people are having psychological changes, but how are we addressing those challenges?
And so mental health has been a bit overlooked.
Yes, it has been overlooked in a number of things. That mental health should be a priority.
Yes.
And this also needs multi-sectoral support. Because people that are struggling with mental health are in our families, they are at work, they are in the community, they are within all these institutions. So we need a multi-sectoral approach to dealing with issues of mental health. And we also need, like we've said, people to access the services, the necessary services, the psychotherapy, the psychologists and all that. They need to be able to talk to someone.
Yes.
Yes.
As the male to pioneer the HIV programming, that NGO, the True Men Trust.
Yes.
Gantsi ha re bua ka mental health, it seems like men are left behind in the conversation. What approach, what efforts can be done geared towards calling in men to have this particular conversation?
Yeah, well, I think there are many initiatives that we can put in place. First and foremost, let's go to the places that men love. The soccer, Sunday soccer, and all those things. Let us bring them in as partners, and so that we are able to reach to this man.
Yes.
Let us go to the churches. Let us go to institutions that have got the biggest number of men, the police, the BDF, and all those. Let us go there. Let us reach men in those places. Yes.
But I think maybe also what can be done is a self-assessment. Me, I want to venture into such a program. I need to not being mentally aware, not having your mental health on check is a weakness.
Yes, and because we have been talking about GBV, I'm not in the right state of mind. Is a weak guy. So we need to detach ourselves from that kind of thinking and say that it's normal for everyone, whether it's a man, whether it's a woman, whether they are rich, poor, educated, uneducated, to at times go through mental challenges. So we need to then be in a position to accept that I can go through a mental challenge. And when I'm going through a mental challenge, I must seek help. We must normalize that. And that normalization is going to, and acceptance is going to come from people understanding that there's simply nothing wrong with feeling the way that I'm feeling. Yes. And if I feel this way, the right thing for me to do is to simply access the mental health services. And that there is absolutely no stigma in seeking mental health services. I'm an outcast for seeking this kind of thing. I'm doing what is necessary for me, what is necessary for my partner, my children, my family, and my community, and my country.
Yes.
So we need to look at these things like that. We don't need to see those things as being weak. Counseling. I'm now counseling. Yes, I cancel. There's nothing like we cancel. We need to access the service done by professionals who spent many years of school learning all that.
Yes, which is also a multisectoral issue. Eh?
Yes, but that are the best way to approach these issues is multisectoral.
Yes, yes.
It's multisectoral, all the way to the individual.
Yes. All right.
So, and I as an individual, I need to be accessing the service.
Yes.
But for you to access that service, it needs to exist. So somebody should have set it up. That is why the multisectoral approach.
Yes. All right. Maybe going back to the conversation, gender-based violence. You know, there are often instances where I think that one we can all agree. But you know, there are often instances where can then now a child then interpret this as maybe is it not maybe then them trying to interpret that as, okay, no, my mom beating me is maybe her saying that, you know, I actually do love you?
It's possible that it can be interpreted that way. That's a wrong interpretation. Because where there is love, there should no violence. I know and I want to believe that for our parents, because they didn't know what we know. They didn't see the things that we are now seeing today. We shouldn't be acting the same way. I think we must forgive them for that and then move on and, you know, act right. We cannot be at this stage be showing people love by beating them up. A child that is beaten up is the same child that tomorrow tolerates GBV because you see, love is also attached to some kind of violence. So we must remove the violence so that it should not be confusing at any stage. Violence love only. Yes. Understanding and, you know, nelano. So I think that is very dangerous for making people accept violence later on and associating it with love.
Yes. And maybe just to pick your brain, you know, there's sex work, although it might not be maybe legalized in paper and all that, but at the end of the day, you know, the sex workers, there are people that are human. And in issues of gender-based violence, how are they assisted? Do they even come out to say, I was abused in this manner?
Yes, actually the programs, the organization that I work for, together with other organizations like Bobonella, are involved in that. And sex workers are some of the people that face a lot of GBV.
Yes.
So there's a legal assistance program called Bobonella dealing with that, allowing them to be able to report and, you know, buy take and all that. And also for them to access money services, counseling and those kind of things, because they face a lot of GBV.
Yes.
Yes, the power relations there, where men are so powerful that because ba duela akere, ba kgona go gana go duela, ba kgona gore, so they in many cases violate batho ba ba modimo ba.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and maybe let's speak about solutions that we can maybe employ as a country, as civil societies, as individuals, as advocates. What term solutions can you or would you propose to reduce the rate at which we see the numbers of violence in domestic and romantic relationships?
First and foremost, let's have a public education program on this. Let people be aware that violence exists, that GBV also exists, and it doesn't need to be there. Violence doesn't solve anything. Let's spread that message deliberately. Once in a while, radio, TV. Let there be foot soldiers on the ground, just like HIV, so that they talk to people, they give them that dithuto tshwanetseng gore re itemoge ba e leng gore di-perpetrator tsa violence le ba e leng gore they are suffering under this violence and they have not known it up to now, ba lemoge, because it may gore ha go sa addressiwe at this stage, it may ending up mo dintshong, mo the grievous bodily harm and all those kind of things. So we did not get to that stage. So a thuto e tsenelele, a go nne le thuto e supang gore go nne le emphasis in terms of gender equality, go nne le emphasis ya gore ga gona e o leng gore o na le thata epe mo gope ya go mo tsenya letsogo, ya go mmuisa ka bata, batho ba buisane sentle. Let us reform the laws, let us strengthen the laws, let us provide more opportunity for psychosocial treatment, let us provide the necessary infrastructure, the safe homes, those kind of things. Let us engage batho ba ba kwa dikgosi, bagolo, and all these people in the talk around our culture. How do we want our culture to best support us, not to work against us, because a culture that emphasizes violence is a culture that is working against our best interests. So we need to deal with a number of these issues. Look at issues tsa gore re-empower young people, re-empower basadi, those, because the evidence on the ground is that these are people that sometimes get punished, violated, simply because they do not have the means. Yeah, so we need to work on those things and empower men also. Let us empower men to understand that they don't have to resort to violence. Yes. They need to find healthy behaviors to, like, searching for counseling, those kind of things. Violence that has got no place in our modern society. So there is a lot that could be done, and the multi-sectoral approach that we have been talking about, so that everybody should come to the table.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I liked the part where you spoke about structural adjustments, and when you spoke about education. Structural adjustment would come at the expense of people being educated and sensitized about GBV.
Yes, it would happen. I mean, if we invest in that kind of education, it eventually would show in terms of how our society turns up. People will start making different choices. People will start acting differently from the way that they've been acting throughout time. Yeah, so I think it's really important.
Yes, and maybe within schools, maybe that would be tertiary institutions. Gender-based violence, we cannot maybe shy away from sexual harassment, right? What can be done in that respect? Tertiary schools, you have your 18-old 18, 20-year-old students, and then we also have lecturers. We have staff who are you know, some are pursuing romantic relationships. Kamuso bata ba change di kgang kana defects is tsone gone gore no this was a romantic relationship and not me using this child because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 issues. In terms of that complex issue and in trying to deal with GBV, how then do we approach that delicate matter?
Yeah, well, I think the way I understand you is you've talked about relationships where there's power imbalance, where those young girls are also involved with older men and all that. And you're asking how do we address those kind of challenges? Well, I think in addressing the challenges, one of the things, I think education is also very key. Education for the children and education for the adults. Engaging in this intergenerational relationship with these kids is unhealthy in a way, in that those kids are not really in a position to make the big decisions that we want them to make. Should they engage in sex? Should they engage in what? We should give them time so that they come at a later stage to make the choice for themselves. But they are usually compelled by their economic situation. They want to own that iPhone, they want to own this kind of thing, and they know the older men are the ones that can provide for those kind of things. So we need to also teach the children that they can survive without these things until such a time that they themselves can buy those kind of things. And for men to stay away from those kids, because honestly, this is interfering with their growth. It's unfair on the kids, and we need to emphasize this kind of message. And it's only through education that this kind of things can happen. I know government has tried a lot of things, even raising the age of consent, so that to discourage this kind of relationships, which we must really discourage, because the effects on the girl child is terrible.
Yes. I had asked a question about your short-term solutions, the one which you propose, and I was going to ask you maybe about the long-terms, but earlier on you did throw some long-term solutions. But then maybe in the long-term solutions, what is your take on maybe gender proportional representation?
It's key. Gender proportional representation in decision-making structures is an important thing. I'm a big supporter of that, and I think part of the reason why we are also seeing the rise in all those cases and in inequalities and all that, it's partly because of the fact that women are not well represented at the decision-making tables. They need to be represented at the decision-making tables equally with men, so that they can be able to have a voice on the issues that affect them. In many cases, you would find that it's a parliament or a council of majority 75% or 80% men discussing an issue that essentially is a woman's issue. We're commenting on abortion, we are commenting on pregnancy, commenting on it's men. Why is it not women themselves discussing that? And coming to us and telling us this is what would work for us? It's because they are missing from this decision-making structures.
Okay. Yeah. In the interest of time, our conversation is about to end. So I'd ask that maybe you give us a closing remark, a conclusion to today's episode. And yes.
No, thank you very much, Sepi. So I think what I can say to our people back home is that we need to all be involved in the fight against violence and the fight against GBV. No civilized society, like I've said, would pride itself with having so much violence. Violence is one of the most primitive things that shows that people are not well cultivated, not well developed. There's still a lot that needs to be done. But we can simply escape all this violence and all these things by behaving accordingly. and by also asking the partners, asking people responsible for, government, civil society, private sector, the individuals and everybody else to come to the table and say, what are they going to put forward in the fight against the GBV? So I think we all need to come. And at where we are right now, and especially last week when this thing started emerging, or last week or 2 weeks ago, we're busy pointing fingers at each other. We're busy pointing fingers at each other. We're always trying to find a scapegoat. There's a new government in place. We want to point fingers at the new government. We want to point fingers at the new minister. We want to point fingers at the police. We want to point fingers at the what. We shouldn't be there. We should be sitting around and saying, what are we going to do as a society? So there should be platforms in existence that take our views on some of these things, where everybody comes around the table and is able to. Sometimes I think that is exactly what is lacking in this country. There will be somebody talking, making very good points there, somebody making a good point there, but these people are not coming together to then consolidate what they are thinking and then turn it into a project, a program that can work and save the people. So we need a convener. We need somebody to convene us. And I think that is where the ministry can play a very important role. We need to have talks. We need to talk about this thing. Violence, violence in our society. Because GBV, now thinking of it, we may be having a lot of GBV because indeed by nature we are a violent society. So it will show in many ways, including through GBV. Maybe it is more defined now through GBV, but it speaks to the bigger challenge of violence, that we are a violent society. We violate people to show love, that kind of thing, less we claim. That kind of thing. We need to revisit all these things and be conscious of them, because for a long time we've been covering this thing, and usually this GBV thing is associated with us, the poor people, so maybe also there should be investigations. If it is us, the poor, that are engaged in this kind of violence, why are the poor so violent? Why are we so violent? Maybe it has to do with our economic position in society, that all these things can be addressed through the research that we have been talking about, because it will also measure perceptions. A very good study will also measure perceptions. We need to have a comprehensive study.
Yes.
That is the basis upon which we are going to build a solid response mechanism to the pandemic GBV.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Moseki. Thank you for your continued efforts and commitment to advancing gender integration in development initiatives. That was our episode on gender-based violence with Mr. Kabo Moseki. My name's Asip Sumutudi, and stay tuned for more.